On a frigid January morning in 1882, the quiet town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, awoke to a discovery that would haunt it for generations. Martha Cooperfield, the 34-year-old wife of Mayor Theodore Cooperfield, was found dead in her locked study, a leather-bound journal clutched in her hands. Authorities seized the book immediately, sealing it away from prying eyes. What shocked the town wasn't just her sudden death, but what lay inside 17 pages filled with names, dates, and financial records written in her careful hand, evidence of a conspiracy implicating some of Millbrook's most powerful citizens. The official report called it heart failure, but those who saw her that morning described her eyes frozen in terror and her fingers stained with ink as if she had been writing until the very moment her life was taken. The sheriff dismissed the journal as simple household accounts, yet 3 witnesses swore it contained proof of secret meetings, suspicious deaths, and corruption that could topple the town's elite. Whatever Martha discovered in those final weeks was dangerous enough that someone ensured she would never reveal it. To understand how it began, we need to step back to the autumn of 1881, when the first death shattered Millbrook's fragile calm. Nestled in the coal-rich valleys northeast of Pittsburgh, Millbrook was a town of 3,000, its fortunes tied to the railroads, mines, and the booming textile mill. The Susquehanna River wound through the valley like a dark ribbon, its waters turned gray by coal dust that coated the town like a permanent shroud. Mayor Theodore Cooperfield, an ambitious businessman with his eyes on higher office, had married Martha Henley in 1873. Bright, educated, and refined, she had once thrived as the mayor's wife, organizing charity events and managing the town's tightly knit social world. Her intelligence and discretion were widely respected, and her detailed leather-bound journals, a lifelong habit, were a quiet but precise record of the town's undercurrents. By late 1881, as unseasonable warmth gave way to an early bitter winter, tensions in Millbrook deepened between the old Protestant families and the newer immigrant workforce. During this time, Martha became withdrawn, spending hours in her study, overlooking the town square or taking solitary evening walks along the river. To friends, she brushed off concern with a polite smile. But behind that facade, she had begun to see troubling pattern stories that didn't match secrets whispered at dinner parties, and discrepancies between public words and private actions. On October 15, 1881, the first death drew her attention. Hinrich Zimmerman, a respected foreman at the textile mill, husband, father of 3, and a man with no enemies, never reported for work that morning. By the next dawn, a search party found his body at the bottom of Raven's Gorge, 3 miles from his usual route home. His neck was broken, yet his boots were clean, his lunch untouched, and there was barely a trace of blood. Nothing about the scene made sense. Sheriff William Callahan, a staunch ally of Mayor Cooperfield, quickly declared it an accident, claiming Zimmerman had taken a shortcut and fallen. The case was closed within 2 days, no questions asked. But to Martha Cooperfield, this was the first clue in a puzzle she could no longer ignore. Martha Cooperfield happened to be at the mill office the very afternoon Hinrich's absence was first noticed there to discuss arrangements for the annual harvest dance. As the supervisors whispered anxiously, she studied Heinrich's time card and spotted what no one else did. He had signed out at exactly 5:30 p.m., his usual hour, but the signature was shaky and hesitant, nothing like his normally precise hand. That evening, when she mentioned his death over dinner, Theodore's reaction chilled her. He froze fork halfway to his mouth and immediately pressed her with pointed questions about who found the body and what the sheriff planned to do. When she speculated that Hinrich might have met someone near Raven's Gorge, his sharp rebuke cut her short. "Martha, it's not appropriate for you to speculate. The man had an accident. That's the end of it." But Martha knew people, and she knew when someone was lying. That night, in the privacy of her study, she opened a fresh leather journal and wrote her first entry about Hinrich Zimmerman's death, recording every detail, his signature, the circumstances, and her husband's reaction. Something about the case was deeply wrong, and she intended to find out what. Over the following weeks, Martha listened more closely than ever during the dinners, meetings, and social gatherings where the town's elite mingled. Strange phrases began to surface, talk of arrangements, balancing the books, and an unusual number of late-night private meetings between her husband and a familiar circle of men. Sheriff Callahan Mill, Supervisor James Crawford, Bank President Charles Hartwell, Judge Samuel Brennan, and Dr. Marcus Fielding, the town's physician and coroner. She had known these men for years, but now she noticed their secretive glances and coded conversations. Then in November, a second death shook the town. Patrick O'Sullivan, a 28-year-old Irish immigrant and bank bookkeeper, was found drowned in the Susquehanna River. Reliable, careful, and devoted to his family, Patrick had been seen arguing with someone outside the bank days earlier. Fielding ruled the death an accident, blaming alcohol. But Patrick's widow, Bridget, confided to Martha that her husband rarely drank and had been deeply troubled by discrepancies in the bank's records. He had worked late trying to fix numbers that didn't add up. Curious, Martha began walking past the bank in the evenings and often saw lights burning in the upstairs offices long after hours. More than once she spotted Theodore's carriage parked behind the building alongside those of the same men. By December, Martha's journal entries had become a meticulous record of a disturbing pattern. Not only Heinrich and Patrick, but 5 other immigrant men had died in Millbrook under questionable circumstances over the past 2 years. Each of them held jobs that gave them access to sensitive records, mill accounts, bank ledgers, property deeds. Determined to confirm her suspicions, she visited the courthouse, where Judge Brennan's nervous young clerk, Thomas Waverly, had first denied her access to certain files. With persistence and charm, she convinced him to allow her a look at probate records, land transfers, and business licenses. What she found made her blood run cold. In dusty ledgers, she traced a web of fraudulent land deals, embezzled funds, and a systematic effort to remove anyone who came too close to exposing the conspiracy. Heinrich had overseen production records that could have revealed overbilling on government contracts. Patrick had seen irregular bank transfers tied to these same men. On December 30th, Martha filled 17 pages with what she had pieced together. At the center of it all was her husband. Theodore Cooperfield wasn't just involved, he was orchestrating it. Using his office, he directed the fraudulent contracts, manipulated property values, and relied on Sheriff Callahan's sham investigations to bury evidence. But in her thoroughness, Martha made a fatal mistake. She didn't realize that young Thomas Waverly was Brennan's nephew and that everything she uncovered was being reported back to the group. As January 1882 began, a blizzard buried Millbrook in snow, cutting the town off from the outside world and cloaking it in a tense, suffocating stillness. Somewhere in that cold silence, her enemies decided she knew too much. In those windswept January days, Martha Cooperfield made the most dangerous decision of her life: to confront her husband. The blizzard had locked Millbrook in snowdrifts, yet Theodore's study never stayed empty. Sheriff Callahan trudged in on snowshoes on the 4th, Dr. Fielding arrived on horseback the next day, and on the 6th, Judge Brennan braved the storm to meet behind a closed door for nearly 3 hours. That evening, as the skies finally began to clear, Martha waited until after dinner, when Theodore settled into his chair by the fire. She had rehearsed every word, planning to speak as a concerned wife, not an accuser. At first he listened, but as she outlined the pattern of deaths, the irregular accounts, and the strange late-night meetings she had uncovered, his expression hardened. "Martha," he said softly, lowering his newspaper, "you've been very busy, haven't you?" His voice was so cold, so empty of familiarity, that for a moment she felt she was speaking to a stranger. "I was only worried," she replied, "about the town, about the deaths." "About things that are none of your concern," he cut in sharply. Then, with unnerving calm, he asked the question that froze her blood. "What have you done with the information you've gathered?" In that instant, she understood he already knew. He knew about the courthouse visits, the conversations with the widows, the long walks past the bank. The conspiracy reached further than she had guessed, and they had been watching her the entire time. "I haven't done anything," she said truthfully. "I was hoping you could help me understand." His eyes narrowed. "Where is it, Martha? Where have you written it all down?" Her heart pounded as she realized that the journal hidden upstairs was the only proof she had, and the only thing keeping her alive. "You're frightening me," she said, rising to leave. "I think I'll retire for the night." But Theodore was faster. He crossed the room and blocked the stairs, his body language quiet but menacing. "The journal," he said. "I know you've been keeping one. Did you really think no one was watching every careful step she had taken, had been tracked?" She was already in the web, and it was closing. "I need time to think," she said, stalling. "We can talk in the morning." "No," Theodore replied flatly. "We'll talk now. You will bring me that journal, and you will forget everything you think you know. Be sensible, and maybe we can avoid drastic measures." The meaning was clear. Those same words, she realized, had probably been spoken to Heinrich Zimmermann and Patrick O'Sullivan before their deaths. To hand him the journal was to sign her death warrant. "Just a moment," she said, gesturing to the stairs. "Let me collect myself." After a long pause, Theodore stepped aside. "Of course. But don't keep me waiting, and don't do anything foolish." Martha climbed the stairs, feeling his gaze on her back. In her small study, she moved quickly, pulling the hidden journal from its drawer and opening to a fresh page. Her hands shook as she began to write what she feared would be her final words. January 6th, 1882, 9:30 p.m. "Theodore knows everything. My life is in immediate danger. If anything happens to me, the previous pages of this journal hold the truth. Heinrich Zimmermann, Patrick O'Sullivan, and 5 others were murdered to protect a fraud involving government contracts and bank funds. Theodore Cooperfield, Sheriff Callahan, Judge Brennan, Dr. Fielding, Charles Hartwell, and James Crawford are all involved. If I die tonight, it will not be of natural causes." As her pen scratched across the paper, the creak of floorboards below reached her ears, then the sound of the front door opening. Muffled voices joined Theodore's. He was no longer alone. More men had arrived, despite the storm, and they had come for her. Martha closed the journal, and instead of hiding it in the desk as she always had, slipped it inside her heavy winter coat. If this night was to be her last, she was determined that the evidence would not die with her. She had already chosen a desperate plan, one slim chance to save both her life and the truth. But it would depend on timing and luck. For 10 long minutes, she waited, listening to the muffled voices rising from the parlor below. When she was sure the men were deep in conversation, she opened her study door and crept down the hall to the back stairs. She could pick out the tones: Theodore calm and commanding, Sheriff Callahan blunt and forceful, Dr. Fielding's quiet precision. The kitchen was empty and silent, the servants long since dismissed because of the storm. Pulling on her boots and wrapping her coat tight around the hidden journal, she slipped out the rear door into the yard. The cold struck her like a blow, the wind stinging her face, but she forced herself forward, keeping low along the fence line as snow swallowed her tracks. Her goal was the Hendrick house 2 doors away, where she could hide the journal and reach someone beyond Millbrook's reach, a state marshal, perhaps even someone in Harrisburg. But at the edge of her property, she froze. Men's voices called her name from the storm, and lanterns swayed behind her house, their glow cutting through the snow. Theodore's voice was clear. "Martha, come back inside before you catch your death." There was no warmth in it, only the patient cruelty of a hunter. Martha ran. She stumbled through drifts, skirts snagging on fences, boots slipping on ice. The voices drew closer. Callahan was shouting orders, others answered back. They had brought men to hunt her. She reached the Hendricks door and pounded with all her strength, but the house was empty and dark. No answer. No refuge. With nowhere else to go, she turned toward the town center, hoping to find the rail station or even a passerby. The lanterns were everywhere now, sweeping across the streets in a deliberate pattern. They were not searching. They were driving her, cutting off escape with practiced precision. Exhaustion clawed at her. The cold slowed her body, her breath burned in her chest. She needed somewhere safe to leave the journal, somewhere it might be found if she never left this night alive. Ahead stood St. Catherine's Church, its tall spire rising above the snow. If she could just get inside, she might hide the book. But as she neared, she saw light in the parsonage windows. More than one lantern. They had already anticipated her next move. Panic surged through her. Instead of going to the door, she veered toward the cemetery behind the church, plunging into the maze of gravestones. The snow muffled her steps, and the stones threw long, jagged shadows under the moonlight. Near the far wall, she found what she needed: the massive Caldwell family monument, a granite angel whose wings sheltered a shallow alcove. She dropped to her knees and clawed at the frozen ground with bare hands, numb fingers tearing away snow and hard earth. Wrapping the journal in her scarf, she wedged it deep into the shallow hole and covered it quickly with dirt, stones, and snow. She had barely finished when the sound of boots came closer, deliberate and slow-moving between the rows of graves. A lantern's beam swept past, and a voice rang out sharp as a gunshot. "There she is!" Callahan's shout split the night. She rose, hands raised, as 4 lanterns converged on her hiding place. Theodore Callahan, Dr. Fielding, and James Crawford stood in a semicircle, their faces carved from stone, their expressions grim with finality. The cemetery was silent, except for her ragged breathing and the crunch of boots on snow as they closed in. The lantern light danced across stone angels and crosses, turning the cemetery into a stage for what Martha knew might be her final act. "Martha, my dear," Theodore said with feigned warmth, his voice smooth and poisonous. "What on earth are you doing out here in this weather? You'll catch pneumonia." The irony of his concern made her skin crawl. She searched his face for the man she had married 9 years before, but found only cold, calculating eyes, the eyes of a stranger who had been rehearsing this moment for years. "I needed air," she said, amazed that her voice stayed steady. "I felt faint after our conversation." "Of course you did," Dr. Fielding murmured as he stepped forward, his black medical bag heavy in his gloved hand. "The strain of learning about your husband's work can be overwhelming for a delicate constitution. Perhaps I should examine you when we return." She understood perfectly. He was already preparing the official story: a weak heart, a collapse brought on by stress and the storm. Just like Henrik Zimmerman's heart failure, just like Patrick O'Sullivan's accidental drowning. Her eyes caught the faint outlines of glass vials pressing against the worn leather of his bag. How many times had he carried those same tools to silence witnesses? How many lies had he written into death certificates? "The examination can wait." Sheriff Callahan interrupted, his voice curt, his breath clouding in the frozen air. "We need to settle this now. You've caused a stir tonight, Mrs. Cooperfield." James Crawford shifted uneasily. "Perhaps we should talk somewhere private. If anyone sees—" "No one is out in this weather," Theodore said. "And this won't take long." "Will it, Martha?" The certainty in his tone chilled her more than the snow. These men had done this before. They spoke like businessmen, finalizing a transaction, not conspirators about to kill a woman in a graveyard. "Where is it?" Theodore asked softly, stepping closer. "The journal. You didn't have time to destroy it, and you didn't leave it behind." "Where did you hide it?" She said nothing. But in that terrible silence, her eyes betrayed her, darting just for a heartbeat toward the base of the Caldwell monument. It was enough. Theodore's lips curved into a small, satisfied smile. "Ah, right here is it. How convenient." He turned to Crawford. "James, check the base of the monument. I believe our dear Martha has been doing some winter gardening." Crawford knelt, swept aside the snow, and within moments pulled free the bundled journal. He held it up. "Got it," he said, brushing away the dirt and ice. Theodore took it and flipped through the pages, his expression unreadable as he skimmed the contents. 17 pages, he said quietly. Names, dates, accounts, even diagrams of the bank's security. Martha, you've been thorough." Dr. Fielding leaned close, scanning the pages. "She knows about the chloroform," he said. "And the staged accidents?" "Too much detail," Callahan muttered. "If this gets out, it won't," Theodore said, closing the book and tucking it inside his coat. "We're going to settle this here and now, permanently." Martha found her voice. "You killed them," she said, her breath coming in quick, cold bursts. Henrik found out about the contracts. Patrick saw the missing money. How many others have you murdered? Theodore tilted his head, as though considering whether she deserved an answer. Too many, he said at last, but that problem will be solved tonight. Once you're gone, everything goes back to normal. The contracts continue. The profits flow. No more accidents. Henrik trusted you, she pressed, driven by a surge of fearless anger. He came to you because he thought you'd help him, and you threw him off that gorge? A slow, cold smile spread across Theodore's face. Heinrich was a good man, he said calmly. Honest, loyal, devoted. Admirable qualities, but dangerous ones when they lead to questions no one should be asking. Yes, he came to me with his concerns. And yes, I helped him understand just before Callahan and I helped him fall. His casual admission drained the heat from her blood. He spoke of murder as if it were bookkeeping. And Patrick, she asked, though she dreaded the answer. Patrick was more complicated, Dr. Fielding said smoothly. Stepping closer, the lantern light catching the glint of glass vials in his bag. Dr. Fielding's voice was smooth, almost clinical, as though he were lecturing on a medical procedure. Patrick was different from Heinrich. He wasn't naive enough to come to us directly. He worked quietly, made copies of records, asked questions he shouldn't have. He even planned to contact authorities outside Millbrook. So yes, we drowned him, but I sedated him first, morphine, during a routine examination. He was unconscious before he hit the water. There was no suffering. The cold detachment in his tone made Martha's stomach turn. These men had turned murder into a process complete with medical precision, as if it were nothing more than paperwork. And the others, she demanded, her voice shaking. Samuel Kowalski, Michael Brennan, Thomas Muller, William O'Brien, Joseph Santini. Various methods, Sheriff Callahan said without hesitation. Kowalski fell from the mill's loading dock during a night shift. Brennan was jumped by ruffians on his way home, robbery gone wrong. Oddly, his wallet was never taken. Muller had a hunting accident. O'Brien and Santini, sudden heart failure. Dr. Fielding's expertise is extensive. Each death tailored, Dr. Fielding added almost proudly. We study habits. We choose methods that fit the man. Accidents, no one questions. They spoke as if they were craftsmen, admiring their own skill, as if the lives they had erased were no more than troublesome accounts to balance. Martha stared at them, numb with horror. Why, she whispered. All of this just for money? How much is worth so many lives? Theodore laughed, a low, humorless sound that made the hair rise on her neck. You still don't understand. This isn't about a few stolen dollars. We've built a machine, a system that generates wealth on a scale you can't begin to imagine. It's invisible. Every contract awarded to Millbrook businesses runs through me. Every property tax, every assessment, every bank loan, we control it all. We've privatized the entire town while keeping up the pretty illusion of democracy. The mill alone has brought in over $40,000 in false revenue these last 2 years, Crawford added eagerly. Mining contracts, another 60. Land deals, taxes, bank loans, $200,000 in total. Martha's breath caught. $200,000. A sum vast enough to buy silence from anyone, to corrupt courts and officials across the state. And it's only the beginning, Callahan said. We've set up similar operations in 3 other towns already. In 5 years, half of Pennsylvania will be ours. The truth hit her like the wind. This wasn't just Millbrook's rot. This was the seed of something larger, something that could strangle the law itself. Someone will notice, she said desperately. The state, the newspapers, the federal government. Not if we act fast, Theodore said. That's why Heinrich and Patrick had to die. They saw too much. And now you have too. Dr. Fielding stepped forward, pulling a folded white cloth from his bag, the gesture almost casual. It's time. The longer we stay out here, the greater the risk. Martha's mind raced. She had one chance left, one last hope. I mailed copies, she said, suddenly her voice loud and clear in the frozen air. 3 days ago, before the storm, I sent copies of the most important pages to the Attorney General in Harrisburg, to the U.S. Marshal's office in Philadelphia, and to the editor of the Pittsburgh Gazette. The effect was immediate. The men froze, their confidence fractured like ice underfoot. Theodore's smile faltered for the first time that night, his eyes narrowing as the wind howled around them. Even if you kill me and burn my journal, the evidence is already in the hands of people you can't touch. Martha's words rang out clear in the frozen air. The lie was so confident, so perfectly delivered, that all 4 men paused. Lantern light flickered across their faces as they exchanged quick, uncertain glances. For the first time that night, doubt crept in. She's bluffing, Crawford muttered, but the conviction in his voice faltered. No mails left town in days. Before the storm, Martha countered, holding her ground. January 3rd, the last day the coach ran. Ask Ezra Wainwright. He'll remember the 3 letters I posted, one to the Attorney General, one to the U.S. Marshal in Philadelphia, one to the Pittsburgh Gazette. I told him they were Christmas greetings, but the official addresses were on the envelopes. He'll confirm it. Theodore's face paled. She saw the calculation in his eyes. If she was telling the truth, her death would only confirm the conspiracy. If she was lying, they still couldn't risk being wrong. What exactly did you send them? Callahan demanded. Word for word, Martha. What did you write? Thinking fast, she spun the lie with precise detail. Copies of the bank records showing the fraudulent transfers. Documentation linking Heinrich's death to what he discovered about the contracts. And instructions, if anything happens to me, investigate the entire Millbrook power structure for corruption and murder. The detail gave her story weight, but Theodore's eyes narrowed. He knew her well enough to spot improvisation. Show me your hands, he said abruptly. What? Your hands, now. She hesitated, then pulled off her gloves, holding her hands toward the lantern glow. Ink stained her fingertips from writing earlier that night, but no trace of the deep red sealing wax Ezra used on every piece of outgoing mail. You haven't been near the post office in weeks, Theodore said, confidence surging back. That wax leaves a mark for days. You're lying, Martha. Her stomach dropped. The gamble had failed. Where's the journal? He pressed, voice tightening. If you really sent copies, the original doesn't matter. Hand it over and maybe we can settle this without permanent consequences. She almost laughed at the transparent lie. She knew too much. They would never let her live. But her false story had bought her something more valuable than mercy time. And then through the wind, she heard it, a bell tolling midnight from St. Catherine's, followed by distant voices calling her name from the town square. She froze, straining to listen. Theodore Cooperfield. A man's voice shouted. We know you're out there. Callahan swore and snuffed his lantern, motioning for the others. Darkness swallowed the cemetery. Who is that? Crawford hissed. Pastor Henley, Martha said, recognizing her uncle's voice. And he's not alone. At least 3 others. Theodore's hand clamped onto her arm like a vice. He bent to her ear, his breath icy. Make a sound, and I'll kill you right here. But she had already made her choice. For weeks she had written every detail of their crimes. She was not going to die in silence. Help! She screamed, her voice cutting across the graveyard. Help me. I'm in the cemetery. They're trying to kill me. Theodore's hand slammed over her mouth, but the cry was already out. Shouts from the square grew louder, coming fast, feet crunching over frozen snow. Damn it, Callahan barked. We have to go. Not without her. Fielding hissed, fumbling for something in his medical bag. There's no time. Theodore snapped, releasing her arm. Move! But Martha was already running, stumbling blindly between headstones, breath tearing at her lungs. Behind her came the furious whispers of her pursuers, torn between chasing her or vanishing into the night. Martha, Pastor Henley's voice was close now, lantern beams cutting through the cemetery gate. Here she cried, waving her arms. I'm here by the Caldwell Monument. 4 figures swept forward, lights bobbing between the graves. She reached them, collapsing into her uncle's arms, sobbing with relief and terror. Pastor Henley threw his coat around her shoulders as his companions closed ranks, their lanterns forming a trembling circle of light against the wind. "What happened, child?" he asked, his voice low with worry. "We've been looking for you for hours." "Theodore came to the parsonage, said you'd wandered off into the storm, and he feared for your safety." Martha glanced back toward the Caldwell monument, but the men who had hunted her were already gone. Only churned snow and a scattering of footprints remained. Even in the presence of witnesses, she realized she was still in danger. They would simply wait for another moment, another place, another method. "They tried to kill me," she whispered, barely able to force out the words. "My husband and his friends. They've been murdering people to protect their crimes. And tonight they tried to kill me too." The men around her exchanged uneasy glances, clearly struggling to reconcile her words with the reputations of the town's most powerful citizens. Pastor Henley's brow furrowed. His niece's terror was real, but so was his lifelong trust in Theodore Cooperfield and the others. "Martha," he said gently, "you're exhausted. This storm, the cold, the worry, perhaps you've misunderstood something. Your husband came to me truly concerned." But she could already see the doubt in his eyes. Without proof, her words would be dismissed as hysteria brought on by weather and fear. When these well-meaning men left her at home, the predators who hunted her would come again, and next time they would not fail. As they walked back through the blizzard-lit streets, lanterns swaying against the snow, Martha understood the grim truth tonight. She had only won a reprieve. The real battle was still ahead, and the men she feared now knew exactly how much she had uncovered. In the following days, as Millbrook dug out from the blizzard, life seemed to return to normal. But everything had changed. Friends who once greeted her warmly now avoided her gaze. Neighbors grew wary. Word of her accusations had spread, forcing the town to quietly choose sides. In the isolation of her study, Martha wrote like a woman racing against time. Every day she added new pages to the journal, detailed accounts of the cemetery confrontation, every name, every date, every method. It became a document of precision, a final testimony in her own hand. On January 18th, 1882, 12 days after that night in the cemetery, Martha penned her last entry. "They are closing in. I see it in the way Theodore watches me and Dr. Fielding's polite questions about my health and Sheriff Callahan's sudden visits. I have hidden this journal where honest investigators may someday find it, but I fear it will be too late for me. If I die, remember that I love this town enough to risk everything to protect it from the rot that has taken hold here." That evening, Martha Cooperfield was found dead in her locked study, apparently struck down by heart failure as she wrote. Dr. Fielding's examination was swift and final natural causes. Witnesses confirmed she had recently suffered chest pains. The journal found beside her body contained only household accounts and idle observations. Sheriff Callahan filed his report the next day, dismissing all suspicion. Within 24 hours, the case was closed. 3 days later, the town's leading citizens attended her funeral. But Martha had been more careful than anyone realized. The journal left on her desk was a decoy from 1879. The real book, 17 pages filled with the truth, remained buried in its hidden wooden box at the base of the Caldwell monument, wrapped in her scarf, waiting for someone brave enough to find it. The conspiracy in Millbrook dragged on for 3 more years, claiming 2 more lives before it finally collapsed in 1885. It wasn't an act of justice that stopped it, but a state banking inspector who stumbled across irregularities in the bank's ledgers during a routine audit. What followed was a sweeping investigation that uncovered a web of fraud-rigged contracts, property manipulation, embezzled funds, but the trail of mysterious deaths was never officially tied to the crimes. Theodore Cooperfield and his associates were convicted and sent to prison for their financial schemes, but they never faced a single charge of murder. Martha's truth came to light only in 1923, when workers at St. Catherine Cemetery began relocating graves to make room for a new church building. Buried beneath the Caldwell monument, they unearthed a weathered wooden box. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, preserved against time. When local historian Dr. Rebecca Thornton opened its pages, she realized immediately what she was holding. Thornton's research confirmed everything Martha had risked her life to document. County archives revealed the same pattern of deaths, the same financial irregularities, the same names Martha had written in her neat, unshakable hand. Most shocking of all, Thornton found a corroborating entry in Pastor Henley's personal diary, his own account of the night he rescued Martha from the cemetery, and of the doubts that had haunted him ever since. The journal caused a sensation in Pennsylvania legal circles. Even though the men it accused were long dead, Martha's words exposed the mechanisms of small-town corruption and gave modern investigators a blueprint for dismantling similar schemes. More than that, her notes became a manual for recognizing when accidents are anything but. For the first time, cases from the 1880s and 1890s that had been ruled accidental were reclassified as murders. Their patterns made clear by the woman who had first seen them. The last entry in her hand was almost prophetic. I may not live to see justice done, but truth has a way of surviving even when those who speak it do not. Someday someone will find these words and know what happened in Millbrook. I pray they will have the courage to act, and that my death will not have been in vain. Dr. Thornton's work revealed that the Millbrook conspiracy had been only one branch of a much larger network of political and financial corruption, stretching across western Pennsylvania. Martha's journal became a cornerstone in understanding how these systems worked and how to bring them down. Today, Martha Cooperfield is remembered as one of America's first true investigative journalists, though she never published a word in her lifetime. Her methods, detailed notes, cross-referencing records, noticing patterns everyone else overlooked, have influenced both law enforcement and journalism for over a century. In 1982, the centennial of her death, the Martha Cooperfield Institute for Government Accountability was founded in Millbrook to train investigators in techniques she pioneered and to honor the legacy of the woman who saw too much and refused to look away. The story of Millbrook is also a chilling reminder of how evil hides behind respectability. Theodore Cooperfield, Sheriff Callahan, Dr. Fielding, all outwardly respectable men, pillars of their community, the sort no one ever suspects. Their crimes thrived not because they were clever, but because the town trusted them. The Cooperfield house still stands on Elm Street, converted into apartments now. But the second-floor study where Martha wrote her final entries remains cold, even in summer. Visitors speak of an inexplicable urgency that grips them when they stand at the window overlooking the town square, as if the room itself is still trying to warn someone. Martha's legacy lives on in another way as well. Across the country, police departments now teach investigative techniques based on her journal, training detectives to recognize the patterns. She saw the links between seemingly isolated tragedies that point to something far more sinister. In this way, the voice that her killers tried to silence continues to speak, helping to solve cold cases more than a century later. Millbrook's conspiracy shows us how dangerous secrets can be when they are buried behind trust and power. Martha Cooperfield died because she had the courage to question what everyone else accepted, and because she refused to stay silent. So what do you think? Was everything revealed? Or are there still secrets hidden in Millbrook's past? Let us know in the comments what you believe really happened during those dark months of 1882. If you enjoyed this journey into America's haunted history, subscribe to Liturgy of Fear, hit the notification bell, so you never miss a story, and share this video with someone who loves unsolved mysteries. And remember, truth has a way of surviving, even when those who speak it do not. Thank you all very much for watching my video until the end. I sincerely appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.